Hi everyone! We are back with our discussion of Chapter 10. And so at the beginning of Chapter 10, we find that his new attorney, Malcolm Hunter, is now going to team up with Ron's approval with a law professor named Richard Rosen. And his class is going to help look into his case. And so we find in a letter that Ron wrote to his attorney that he's been in prison so far for 8 years. And a student from the class says that they're going to go through the transcripts from the trial to take a look at everything. And Ron writes a letter to this professor, and he says, Mr. Rosen, allow me to say I'm an innocent man, and there is no doubt I was indeed framed basically from my past record and my interracial relationship that I was involved in at the time of the crimes I was accused and convicted of. Sir, I honestly feel without a doubt that the people involved that caused me to get falsely convicted know that I'm innocent but just wanted me off the streets, and they've done a pretty good job of it, wouldn't you say? So here he's really talking about what we call malicious intent. This idea that people know you're innocent but they're still trying to prove that you're guilty so that you can go away. And unfortunately in some cases police officers, prosecutors, they will do that. But sometimes it's hard to find evidence of that versus when they're just making an accidental mistake. He ends the letter by talking about Bobby Poole. I did learn he was telling people he was in for armed robbery and how he once stalked women out late at night and raped them. That man Poole, I feel without a doubt, has me doing his time, and I'm willing to submit to any test that's available to prove to the courts I'm not guilty. So this new professor, Rich, he ends up hiring a local attorney in Burlington who used to be one of his old students. And so they're just going to simply reinvestigate the case from the beginning. They're going to throw out all these ideas of what happened, and they're just going to go back to the basics and look at the crime itself. Ron has no money, so that means that everybody working on his case is doing this for free. They're not getting anything out of it. And Rich does a really good job of keeping Ron informed of what's going on. And Ron says something about Phil, his original lawyer. I had to give Phil credit for still caring after we lost the second trial when he didn't owe me anything. Rich told me Phil wrote the appellate defender's office when he found out that they had not raised important issues on the appeal. I guess that first guy had just done a rush job and Mr. Hunter felt bad about it. Without that, I don't know if Mr. Hunter would have gotten me to Rich. So even still, Phil is in his corner. And then we have this really kind of sad story of where his family was supposed to meet him for Christmas. They actually fixed up a big meal for him to take that he could eat. And they were 10 minutes too late and they weren't allowed in. And that's very sad. And then Rich sends him a letter saying that we have to be very cautious and study everything carefully because this might be a one-time shot for them. And so they're talking about making a motion for appropriate relief so that the judge will look at certain mistakes that were made in his case. And Rich says that the timing of everything is very important to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row and everything. In 1993, Ron is moved yet again, this time to Harnett. And then they have a motion to preserve evidence. So probably before 2000, there were a lot of times where a case happened, the person was convicted, they go off to prison, and then the evidence was just thrown away. And so it wasn't until the 2000s and later when they saw so many wrongful convictions happening because they didn't have DNA testing in the past, and now we can test for DNA, that states have been trying to pass more laws where they have to preserve that evidence. And so here, that's what they're saying. Don't throw this evidence away, preserve it. And so that was granted. A judge said, yes, we'll do that. Along with that, they have two waitresses that worked with Ron saying that he never harassed them, like his boss said in the second trial. Rich doesn't think that they can do anything about the all-white jury. They didn't think that they have a claim to that, but we know from what I mentioned in the previous chapters, in the last section, the Curtis Flower case, where he was tried 6 times, convicted 6 times, but the Supreme Court last year, or this year, overturned that and said, nope, you can't just pick an all-white jury. It's illegal. and so we know that that was wrong as well. His father had a stroke. And then the big one, 1994 O.J. Simpson trial. And this is very big because this is the first time that DNA testing is on the scene for all of the world to see. It took place in 87 or 88 is when it first started, but it's not until the O.J. Simpson case that people really understood what it was. So his lawyers come to him and say, hey, do you want to do this? Now here's the thing. There are prisoners who say, I want DNA testing done. I didn't commit this crime. They do it, and their DNA is there, right? And it's, they're guilty. So for lawyers, they just have the word of their client. So they ask him again, look, if this comes back you, there's not a judge in the world who's going to exonerate you. And Ron says yes. And this was his last hope, basically. But then there's a problem with overcrowding. And so the governor of North Carolina talks with some governors of other states, and so Ron is one of many inmates who is taken from North Carolina, and he's taken all the way to Tennessee. And he can't refuse that. So it means no family visits, no visits from attorneys, but he is granted phone privileges every day with his attorney. He gets a job in the laundry. They finally mail in the motion for appropriate relief. And so his attorney in Burlington has to go and meet with Tom to see what evidence is there. His lawyer Tom is meeting with Mike, the detective, to see what evidence is there. And Mike even makes the comment to Ron's attorney, this is just going to prove that we got the right guy. So even now, still, Detective Mike is still believing that they got the right guy. DNA testing in his case is approved. And then on page 176 in the middle, Ron says, I don't know what I was more afraid of, the fact that this was my last shot at freedom and it could all backfire like it had before, or that it might work and I would finally walk out into the world again. So again, that idea of hope for a prisoner can be a very two-edged sword, that you really want that hope, but we know that with the criminal justice system, it can take a long time to get released. The DNA has to go to a private lab for testing. The state one is not working out the way it should. And his DNA does not match the DNA found in Mary's case. But then they do not find any DNA from the perpetrator in Jennifer's case. So they say, it doesn't completely clear you. But here's the thing. At trial, they were showing that the same perpetrator in Jennifer's case was the same perpetrator in Mary's case. So if that's the case, and he doesn't match in Mary's case, then he shouldn't match in Jennifer's case. But in the end, Ron is he knows how mad and how pissed Jennifer was at him, and how she was so vocal and so adamant in her testimony that he's worried that even if DNA shows that he's not guilty, that her words will trump that scientific test. And that is where we are at the end of chapter 10, and we finally finish Ron's story in part 2. And so next we're going to start part 3 with chapter 11, where we get to hear from Jennifer and what her life has been like after the first trial. There are no extra videos to watch for chapter 10, so go ahead and go on to the video for chapter 11 for that discussion.